The land in Wyoming in 1885 did not offer comfort. It offered honesty, which was a harder thing. The wind, a constant presence, scoured the plains until the grasses were bleached pale as old bone, and the soil was a fine, red dust that worked its way into everything. The creases of a man's eyes, the folds of his bedroll, the quiet spaces of his memory. Silas Cole had been a man in motion for 3 years, not running from the law, not chasing a gold strike, just moving. He rode a steady bay gelding that knew his moods better than any person left alive, and he led a pack mule that carried all he owned. It was not much. A worn brown coat, a skillet, a rifle, and the quiet weight of a life that had ended long before he had stopped breathing. He was 38, but the sun and a deep-settled grief had carved 48 into his face. He had been a husband. He had been a father. He had been a rancher with 1,000 acres of good Montana grazing land. Now he was just a man who knew how to fix things that were broken, because he could not fix the one thing that mattered most. He was looking for a place to stop, but not to stay, just to earn a few dollars for coffee and shells, to rest his animals, to feel the solidness of work under his hands for a week or two before the restlessness set in again. He followed a creek that ran thin and reluctant through the sagebrush, and it led him to a ranch that looked like it was in the process of being forgotten by the world. The main house was a simple, unpainted clapboard structure, silvered by the sun and wind. The porch sagged. The barn roof had a hole in it the size of a wagon wheel, a dark mouth open to the unforgiving sky. But there were signs of a fight. A small, meticulously tended garden sat beside the house, its rows of beans and squash a stubborn patch of green against the overwhelming brown. The corral, though empty of all but one sway-backed mare, was sound, and a woman was trying to stretch a length of barbed wire at the far corner of a pasture. She was tall, and the wind pressed her faded calico dress against a frame that was lean and angular, without softness. From a distance, Silas could see the strain in her shoulders, the way she braced her worn boots in the dirt. She was alone. He felt the familiar pull of wanting to ride on, to leave her to her struggle. Involvement was a currency he no longer had, but he also saw the straightness of her spine. She was not beaten, just worn. There was a difference. He had seen plenty of both. He nudged his horse forward. As he drew closer, he could see the details. Her hair was the color of dusty straw, pulled back in a severe bun from which strands had escaped to whip across her face. Her hands, gripping the wire stretcher, were raw at the knuckles. She did not look up until his shadow fell over her. Her eyes were the color of a winter sky, a pale, clear gray. They were taking stock eyes. They measured him in a single, unblinking glance. His worn clothes, his capable hands resting on the saddle horn, the exhaustion in his face that mirrored her own. There was no fear in them, only a deep, abiding weariness. "Mom," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. She did not reply immediately, just held his gaze. He saw that the fence post she was working on was new, the raw wood a stark contrast to the weathered gray of the others. The wire was not rusted through. It had been cut, cleanly, 3 separate strands. "It's private property," she said finally. Her voice was low and steady, without inflection. It was a statement of fact, not a challenge. "I see that," Silas answered. "I also see you're one person doing the work of 2. A flicker of something, annoyance maybe, or just resignation, passed through her eyes. "The work gets done. It gets done faster with 2, he said. He swung down from his horse, his joints creaking. The ground felt solid beneath his boots. "I'm looking for a few days' work. I'm handy with wire and wood. Fair with a well pump if it needs it. I'll work for a hot meal and a place in your barn for me and my stock." She looked from him to the cut wire, then back to his face. He saw the calculus in her eyes, the risk of a stranger against the certainty of this endless, solitary labor. The desert doesn't lie, and neither did the lines on their faces. They were 2 people who had been pared down to the essentials. "The barn has a hole in the roof," she said. "I can fix that too," he replied, "after the fence." She held his gaze for a long moment more, a silent conversation passing between them. It was a conversation of shared hardship, of understanding the weight of a day's work when there was no one to share it. Finally, she gave a short, sharp nod. "There's coffee on the stove," she said, turning back to her wire stretcher. "Water the horses at the trough. The pump is stiff." It was not a welcome. It was an acceptance of a temporary necessity. For Silas, that was more than enough. It was something to do. It was a reason to stop, for a little while. He spent the rest of the afternoon working on the fence. Her name, he learned, was Leah. She offered it up with the same practical economy as everything else about her. She did not ask for his name, but he gave it anyway, Silas Cole. She just nodded as if filing it away. He worked with a deliberate, practiced rhythm. He dug a new post hole, set the post, tamped the earth around it until it was as solid as rock. He used his own staples, hammered from his saddlebags. He spliced the cut wire, pulling it taut with the stretcher until it hummed with tension. Leah worked nearby, her silence a companionable thing, not an awkward one. She cleared sagebrush, her movements efficient, wasting no energy. He watched her when she was not looking. He saw the way she moved, with a purposefulness born of necessity. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation. She was like a tool that had been used for a long time, worn but perfectly suited to its task. He saw the neat patch on the elbow of her dress, the way her boots had been resoled with saddle leather and wire. This was a woman holding on by her fingernails and refusing to let go. That evening, they sat at the small kitchen table. The room was sparse and clean. A wood-burning stove, a dry sink, a table, and 2 chairs. Nothing more. She served him a stew of rabbit and vegetables from her garden. It was thin, but hot and nourishing. She gave him the larger portion, a gesture so small and so significant it settled in his chest like a warm stone. They ate in silence. The only sounds were the scrape of spoons against the tin plates and the sighing of the wind outside the cabin walls. After they ate, she spoke. "My stepbrothers cut the wire," she said. It was not an accusation or a complaint. It was a fact, like the color of the sky. They sold the ranch after my father passed. All but this section here, the house and the home pasture. They sold it to a man from Cheyenne, a speculator. He wants the whole parcel. Silas looked at her hands resting on the table. They were not a young woman's hands. They were chapped and strong, the nails cut short. "Why are you still here?" "Because it was my father's," she said, her gray eyes fixed on a point beyond him, out the dark window. "He built this house with his own hands. He's buried on that hill next to my mother. The speculator, Mr. Thorne. He offered me a fair price for this last piece. The Stepbrothers, they want me to take it. They say I'm being stubborn." "Are you?" he asked quietly. She finally looked at him. "I work in town at the Mercantile, 6 days a week. Every dollar I save, I use to buy back a piece of this land. I bought back the 40 acres with the creek last month. That's the fence they cut. They don't want it broken up. They want me to fail so they can sell it all clean." Silas felt something shift inside him. It was a feeling he had not had in years, a quiet, cold anger, not the hot, useless rage of grief, but a clear, steady indignation. He had seen greed before. He had seen bullies. He looked at this woman, with her plain face and her patched dress, and he saw a strength that shamed men like her stepbrothers. "I'll stay on for a few days," he said. "It was not a question. I'll fix the barn roof and check the rest of your fences. I'll take wages." She shook her head. "I can't afford wages." "You can," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. $1 a day plus my keep. It's a fair price and a sound investment." She studied his face, her taking stock eyes searching for something he could not name. He did not know what she found there, but after a long pause, she nodded once more. "All right, Mr. Cole, $1 a day." That night, Silas lay in his bedroll in the barn. Through the hole in the roof, he could see a spray of cold, distant stars. He thought of his own ranch, of the wife whose laughter had filled a house much like this one, of the small son he had taught to ride. Grief doesn't leave. It just learns to share the house. But for the first time in 3 years, it felt like something else was in the house with it. A sense of purpose, a fence to be mended, a wrong to be righted. It was not a home, but it was somewhere to stop. The days settled into a routine. Silas rose before the sun, the chill air sharp in his lungs. He would draw water from the stiff well pump, his work easing the ache in its iron joints, and leave a full bucket on the back step for Leah. He never saw her take it, but it was always empty when he returned from the barn. It was a conversation held without words. He started on the barn roof. The work was honest and straightforward. He stripped away the rotted shingles. His hammer blows a steady, rhythmic punctuation to the morning's quiet. He found a small stack of lumber behind the barn, weathered but sound, and he set about cutting new shakes. The rasp of the saw, the clean scent of pine. It was a language he understood. Leah would leave for town before the sun was fully up, riding the old mare. She would return at dusk, her face smudged with dust, her body slumped with a fatigue that went bone deep. But she never complained. She would see the progress he had made. The growing patch of new shingles on the roof, a repaired gate on the corral, a sharpened axe leaning by the woodpile, and she would give a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was her form of praise, and it was worth more to him than a handful of silver dollars. Their evenings took on a shape of their own. They would eat the simple meals she prepared, the silence between them no longer a void but a shared space. It was in these quiet moments that their stories began to emerge, not in a flood but in small, carefully chosen pieces. One night, as he was mending a bridle, he spoke of his son. His name was Samuel, Silas said, his fingers working the leather without his eyes needing to guide them. He had his mother's smile. He wanted a dog more than anything. I told him when he was old enough to feed it and water it himself, he could have one. He was 5 when the fever came. He did not say more. He did not need to. The silence in the small kitchen held the rest of the story. Leah, who was darning one of his shirts by the light of the kerosene lamp, did not look up from her work. Her needle moved in and out of the worn fabric with a steady, hypnotic rhythm. "My mother died when I was 10, she said, her voice soft. She loved this place. She said the land holds memories. My father, he was a good man but a lonely one. He married my stepmother a year later. She never liked the wind or the quiet. Her sons, Caleb and Jed, they were like her. They always looked at this ranch and saw only the things it lacked. They were trading scars, not for sympathy, but for understanding. They were mapping the barren landscapes of their own pasts, finding common ground in the territory of loss." Silas stayed a week, and then another. The barn roof was finished, solid and tight against the sky. He moved on to the other fences, riding the perimeter of the land Leah had managed to buy back. He found more cut wires, always on the newest parcels she had acquired. It was a campaign of petty cruelty, designed to wear her down, to make her believe the task was impossible. With each splice he made, each post he reset, his resolve hardened. He began to see the land through her eyes, not as a stretch of dusty, unforgiving ground, but as a promise. Each acre she reclaimed was a victory. He was no longer just a hired hand. He was a partner in that fight. Though neither of them ever spoke the words, their connection grew in small, unspoken ways. He noticed she started leaving a tin cup next to the water bucket in the mornings. One day, he returned from the fence line to find a loaf of fresh bread cooling on the table, a rare luxury that must have cost her a good portion of her weekly wages. He took to carving in the evenings, a small block of cottonwood taking shape under his pocket knife. He was carving a meadowlark, its head cocked as if listening. The work quieted the noise in his own head. One evening, after nearly a month of him being there, Leah came home from town later than usual. There was a bruise high on her cheekbone, a faint purple shadow against her pale skin. She tried to hide it by turning her face away from the lamp, but he saw it. He stopped his carving, the knife still in his hand. "What happened?" "It's nothing," she said, her voice tight as she began to prepare their supper. "Leah," he said her name, and the quiet authority in his voice made her stop. She stood with her back to him, her shoulders rigid. "It was Caleb," she said so quietly he almost didn't hear. "He was in town. He was drunk," he said. "He said I was shaming our father's name living out here with a drifter." The cold anger returned, sharp and clear. He placed the half-finished bird and the knife on the table, his movements slow and deliberate. He rose from his chair and went to the dry sink, where he soaked a cloth in cool water. He walked over to her and gently turned her to face him. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but she would not let them fall. He dabbed the cloth against the bruise. His touch was surprisingly gentle. It was the first time they had touched. Her skin was warm. He could feel the fine tremor running through her. They stood like that for a long moment. The world shrunk to the small space between them. The smell of dust and sunlight on her skin, the worn cotton of her dress beneath his fingers. "I'm not a drifter," he said, his voice low. She looked up at him, her gray eyes searching his. "What are you then, Silas Cole?" He had no answer for that. He had not known for 3 years. But standing here, in this small, quiet kitchen, with this determined, bruised woman, an answer began to form. "I'm the man who fixes your fences," he said. It was the truest thing he could say, and for now it was enough. He finished tending to her cheek, and she finished making their supper, and they sat down to eat. But something had changed. The space between them was no longer just shared, it was charged. The quiet house was full of all the things they had not said. That night, when he finished carving the meadowlark, he did not put it in his pocket. He left it on the mantelpiece, a small, silent guardian in the heart of the house. The inevitable confrontation came on a Saturday. Silas was replacing a rotted board on the porch when two riders approached. He knew who they were before they were even halfway up the lane. They rode with the lazy arrogance of men who believe the world belongs to them. They were big men, fleshy and soft where Silas was lean and hard. They pulled up their horses, trampling a corner of Leah's garden without a second thought. Leah came out of the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She stood on the porch, her posture straight, her face a pale, determined mask. Silas did not move from where he was kneeling, his hammer still in his hand. He just watched. "Sister," the larger of the two men said, a sneer in his voice. "This must be Caleb. Still playing at being a rancher? Thorne is getting impatient. He's made his last offer." "This is my land, Caleb," Leah said, her voice steady. "You're trespassing." The other brother, Jed, let out a harsh laugh. "Your land? It's a patch of dirt and sorrow, Leah. Father would be ashamed to see it like this, to see you like this." His eyes flicked to Silas. "And taking in strays, I see. Has he paid you for his keep, or are you giving it away for free?" The insult was crude and deliberate. Silas saw Leah's hands clench into fists at her sides. He rose slowly to his feet, setting the hammer down quietly on the porch railing. He did not want them to think he needed a weapon. His stillness was his weapon. He walked to the edge of the porch and stood beside Leah. He did not look at her, but he could feel her presence beside him, a small fierce heat. He fixed his gaze on the two brothers. "Her name is Mrs. Miller," Silas said, his voice quiet but carrying in the still air. "And this is her property. The road is that way." Caleb's face flushed a dull red. "And who are you to tell us anything? You're just some hired hand she picked up off the trail." "I am," Silas said. "And a hired hand knows the value of a day's work. He knows what it takes to build something and what it takes to tear it down. You boys seem to only know the second part." He took a step down from the porch, placing himself between them and Leah. It was a simple movement, but it was a declaration. He was a wall, a fence, a line they would not cross. Jed, the younger and more volatile one, swung down from his horse. "You need to be taught a lesson, old man." Silas did not even look at him. His eyes remained on Caleb, the one who made the decisions. "There's no profit in this for you," Silas said, his voice reasonable, almost conversational. "Causing trouble here will only bring the sheriff out. Mr. Thorne, your buyer, he won't like that. Men like him, they like clean, quiet transactions, no complications, no reports of assault. It's bad for business." He was not threatening them with violence. He was threatening them with consequences. With the law, with the one thing they understood, the loss of money. Caleb hesitated. He looked at Silas, at his calm, steady eyes, at his capable hands hanging loose at his sides. He saw a man who was not afraid of him, and that was a thing he was not used to. He saw a man who had weighed the costs and was prepared to pay them. Bullies only function when their victim is afraid. Silas was not afraid. He was simply there. "This ain't over," Caleb blustered, but the threat was hollow. He reined his horse around. "Come on, Jed." Jed looked from Silas to his brother, his face a mask of frustration. He spat on the ground, a final useless gesture of contempt, and mounted his horse. They rode away, kicking up dust, their departure as graceless as their arrival. Silas stood and watched until they were small figures on the horizon. The silence they left behind was vast and clean. He turned and looked at Leah. She was watching him, her face unreadable. The wind lifted a strand of her hair and blew it across her cheek. "Thank you," she said. He just nodded. He walked back to the porch, picked up his hammer, and went back to fixing the rotted board. The work was there. It was real. It was what he knew how to do. But as he drove the nail home, with two clean, efficient strikes, he knew that something fundamental had been settled. He was no longer just passing through. He had put a stake in the ground. A few days later, the air felt different. The threat of the Stepbrothers had receded, leaving behind a quiet sense of peace. The land seemed to breathe easier. Silas had finished the major repairs. The ranch, while still worn, no longer looked like it was dying. It looked like it was healing, like it was being cared for. That evening, Silas found Leah by the well. The new handle he had fashioned for the pump moved smoothly, without the old, grating squeal. The sun was low in the sky, painting the undersides of the clouds in shades of rose and gold. The light was soft and forgiving. It softened the harsh lines of the land and the lines of worry on Leah's face. He had been thinking all day, thinking about the road behind him and the road ahead. For 3 years they had been the same road, a long, dusty circle leading nowhere. He was tired of riding. He was tired of being a man defined only by what he had lost. Here, working with his hands, standing beside this quiet, capable woman, he had begun to feel like a man defined by what he could build. He walked over and stood beside her, not too close, but near enough that she did not have to turn her head to see him. They stood in silence for a while, watching the last of the daylight fade. "I have some money saved," he said, his voice steady. He did not look at her. He looked out at the land, at the long stretch of pasture that ran toward the creek. "From my old place. I never touched it. It's not a fortune, but it's enough. Enough to buy back that next parcel, the one along the creek bed." Leah turned her head to look at him. Her expression was guarded, her gray eyes questioning. "Why would you do that?" she asked. Now he turned to face her. He had to say this right. He had to make her understand that this was not charity, and it was not pity. It was a practical matter, an honest proposition between two honest people. "Because this is good land," he said. "It deserves to be whole again. And you deserve for it to be whole." He paused, gathering his courage. "I was thinking we could be partners. I'd put up the money for the land. I'd work it with you. We'd split the profits, fair and square." He watched her face, searching for her reaction. He saw surprise, and then a deep, thoughtful consideration. Her taking stock eyes were measuring him, weighing his words. He knew he had to say the rest of it, the part that was harder, because it was about more than just land and money. "A partnership like that, it works best if it's legal and binding," he said, his voice a little rougher now. "It would be a sound arrangement. We work well together. We understand each other, without needing a lot of words. It would be a good life, Leah, a quiet life, but a good one." It was the most he had ever said at one time. It was a proposal of marriage, but it was also a business plan. It was an offer of his future, his labor, his loyalty, and his name. It was all he had left to give. He had laid it at her feet, and now he could do nothing but wait. Leah was silent for a long time. She looked away from him, out at the land that was the cause of all her struggle and all her hope. The last of the sun's light caught the line of her jaw, the straight column of her throat. He saw the years of solitary struggle in her posture, the fierce, lonely pride that had kept her going. He was asking her to share that burden. He was asking her to trust him. When she finally turned back to him, her eyes were clear. The guard was gone. He saw in them not the desperation of a woman with no other choice, but the calm appraisal of a woman making a conscious, deliberate decision. "Yes," she said. Her voice was as steady and as certain as his had been. "That would be a sound partnership, Silas." She said his name, and it sounded like coming home. 2 years passed. The ranch was no longer a place of stubborn survival. It was a place of quiet prosperity. The name on the deed read Cole, and the land was whole again, all of it, from the creek bed to the low-rising buttes in the east. The house had a new porch, wide and solid, with 2 rocking chairs that Leah had bought from the catalog. The barn was full of hay, and a small, healthy herd of cattle grazed in the pastures. The fences were strong and true. Silas was no longer haunted. The ghosts of his past had not vanished, but they now sat quietly, making room for the peaceful, solid presence of his life with Leah. The lines on his face had softened. He moved with the settled purpose of a man who knew where he belonged. Leah had changed too. The deep weariness had lifted from her eyes, replaced by a calm confidence. Color had come into her face slowly, like a lamp being turned up. She still worked hard, her hands still capable and strong, but now they worked for a shared future, not a solitary fight. She even laughed sometimes, a low, rusty sound that Silas found he liked more than anything. One evening in late summer, they stood on the new porch watching the sun set. A small boy, just turned 1, with his mother's serious gray eyes and a shock of his father's dark hair, slept soundly in a cradle just inside the open door. Silas had carved the cradle from the same cottonwood as the birds. There were 3 of them on the mantelpiece now. A family. He reached out and placed his hand over hers where it rested on the porch railing. Her hand was warm and familiar. It fit perfectly in his. They did not need to speak. The whole of their conversation was there in the comfortable silence, in the shared view of the land spread out before them, their land. "It's good land," Silas said quietly, his voice full of a gratitude that was too deep for more words. Leah leaned her head against his shoulder. "It's home," she replied, and it was. It was a home built not on dreams or passions, but on something far more durable. It was built on mutual respect, on shared work, on the quiet integrity of 2 broken people who had found a way to make each other, and the land, whole again. There is a kind of strength that is not loud. It is not found in the grand gesture or the heroic charge. It is the quiet, stubborn strength of a single fence post holding its line against the wind. It is the resilience of a woman buying back her life 1 acre at a time, saying nothing, simply doing the work. The greatest things are not always seized. Sometimes they are reclaimed, piece by painstaking piece. A home is not always a place you are given. Often, it is a thing you must build with your own 2 hands, with a quiet partner at your side, in the face of a world that believes you have already lost. The hardest thing is not to fall. The hardest thing is to get back up, dust yourself off, and begin to mend what is broken.